me. And I think it will be really interesting panel this morning. It's not really the traditional way they make a presentation, and then we will make a question. But I think this is focus that they can do it. So I will introduce them they will introduce themselves. Starting from Uwe on this side.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I'm Uwe Bender. I was coaching the German men's 8 this year. We won the World Championship and the European Championship and did a world best time on the World Cup in Poznan. So it was a very successful season for me. And thanks for the kind words.
And beside me there is Robin.
Hi, I'm. Is that working? Yeah. I'm Robin Williams. I was working with GB rowing up until about a year ago. In fact, after Rio, and in my coaching career, I had a number of years with Cambridge University with the boat race, which was very exciting, and then more recently, in the last 12 years with British rowing, and particularly with the women's pair that won in London and Rio, and the World Championships in between. And I've spent the last year having a break, actually, so I've been sailing happily around the Mediterranean.
And then we have Tom, that yesterday was introduced, but maybe he can introduce himself maybe with something more than yesterday, if it's possible. What have you done between yesterday and today?
Nothing since yesterday. I think I got a pretty good introduction today. Yesterday, thankfully, but I'm the lead coach for the GB rowing team's Paralympic program.
Good. So we start some questions. Of course, you can add as you want, and I start from Uwe. That is already warm, I think, to have questions. So Uwe, we know that he has some quite long experience in rowing, and not only in Germany. He had one experience also in Australia. It's 4 years you have been there.
Yes.
And do you, as a German, do you have a different philosophy when you work in Australia and when you go back in Germany? You have the same philosophy of coaching?
Well, I had to bring something to Australia to change training program. I think the Australians had to get used to work on ergometers, and they have beautiful weather, so athletes like to row all the time, and they hate ergometers. But I brought some ergometer training to Australia, and I brought also some different strengths ideas, strengths training to Australia. But when I went back to Germany, I brought same thing. I brought some experiences and some different training ideas back to Germany.
And in which period was this in Australia?
I was from 1995 to 2002. Mm-hmm. In Australia, was in the high performance system, head coach in Western Australian Institute of Sport, and I was part of the home Olympics in Australia, Sydney.
Good. We know that Australia and Germany, both of them, they really focus quite a lot on technology. And you took technology also ideas or technologies in Australia and also from Australia to Germany, or it was, how to say, they have a two different way to use technology in rowing?
I think we were on the same standard, just using different systems. One of the presenters yesterday, Connie Draper, she's a German. She went to Australia and studied and finished her PhD in Sydney. And she worked with Australian system, biomechanics system, and we work in Germany. We work with the German FES system, which is similar.
Good. I give you some rest. I go to Robin. Robin, you are quite well known about your view of technique, and I find some also your articles about some specific point of rowing technique. Can you explain a little bit your view of rowing technique, your philosophy when you teach rowers, and which model you like to use?
Yes, well, because I rowed as a lightweight myself many years ago, I had to be really interested in the detail of moving a boat well, because everybody is the same in lightweight rowing. So my philosophy in coaching, I think, came from that experience as a lightweight. And for example, with the Cambridge boat race crews, they were big men, like Marko here from Croatia. He rowed for Cambridge in '95. Big guys, and they always think they can pull harder. If they need to beat a crew, we can just go harder, or get bigger. And you cannot always do that. You know, there is a limit. So for me, technique has no limit, and there is no perfect technique. There's no perfect stroke, but we can always try. And the influences on the technique, I would say, when I began coaching in the 1990s, would have been the Australian awesome foursome. I really liked the positions in the boat and the rhythm and the dynamics, and they were very dominant. And in fact, when I was coaching Helen Glover and Heather Stanning in the women's pair, we used examples of them. Also the Canadian women's pair from the late 90s. We also used Redgrave and Pinsent, Jürgen's crew. In the pair, they were actually very big guys, but very sensitive as well. Steve Redgrave one day rowed in the lightweight 8, and we were all thinking this is going to be bad, you know, difficult. 105 kilo man rowing with us, but it was fantastic. He was really clever in the boat. So influences like that, and I think more recent influences I like would be Ian Wrights and Simon Cox, who coached the Swiss 4, lightweight 4, for example. So I use all sorts of examples, but I think technically, historically, the difference is, we probably all remember the East German and the West German techniques were sort of quite different, and in these days we've done a lot more analysis and research on technique, and I think they are much more similar than they used to be. So I think there's no one technique, but I always try to get the athletes to genuinely learn for themselves, so that they can take a model. So for instance, we're looking at the awesome foursome, you can say, well, we don't want to copy that, but we can see that they do 1, 2, 3 things that we do like, and we'll take little bits of these examples, and they make it work in their own particular crew.
Yes, but if you remember, the Coxes from Australia were big people. Lightweights, they're small, and your woman pair, small. You think the technique of very tall men and heavy, but with good feeling, as you said, it can be, can have a comparison with these different sides of people, because many coaches, me too, we think that big people, they have some possibilities of range of movement. Small people, they should try to make a big arc. Yesterday, all biomechanics, they say, oh, the catch should have a very big angle. For example, 90 degrees in sweep for senior rowers is easy, but for lightweights, it's quite tough to reach 90 degrees. So with this limitation in lightweights, and also for women, of course, how is possible to have similar technique, which point you solve because you get results, so you solve some issues?
Yeah, it's a good question. And in fact, in my coaching career, I've coached men and women, lightweights and heavyweights. And I think for the smaller people, lightweights or shorter people, definitely I like to make use of the trunk as a lever. And not all bigger crews do that. They more or less use the trunk as a fixed point to transfer force. But I think for me, the back, the trunk is one of the three main groups of levers, and it's important. And if you need to create length, 90 degrees, as you say, Gianni, I think it's a lever that you need to use to make length. And that means that getting the correct movement in the hip, in the pelvis, is fundamental to create length, to create power, also to prevent injury. And one other point, I think, with women, generally women have a little less muscle mass in the upper body, in the shoulders and back. And I think it's really important for them to use the back to assist the arms. If they try to just pull the arms in, comparison with some very big men, they can possibly do this. I think for the women, they need the full muscle chain, the full leverage system. So the big muscles help the smaller ones. And for instance, with the women's pair, we couldn't row 90 degrees, but we could row probably more than 85. But the really important thing was the effective length. They were very good once they were in the water of being connected straight away. So the length was not wasted. They had less than, with the biomechanics, it shows absolute length and effective length. And on the catch, particularly Helen Glover would maybe be connected within 2 or 3 degrees of entering the water. Very, very good. Very good. And at the finish, it was sometimes 0 or 1. It was fantastic. And so the effective length was the really important thing, more than how much you can reach for but not use.
So they work a lot on efficiency of stroke. So we have not so much, but we use in the best way. Tom, I have a question for you. We will be back on you, Robin, and rest also you now. Tom, I follow very interested your explanation of yesterday. Was nice, and we understand that really the environment is the key point of your coaching. But as a coach of, we say in commas, of normal rowers, I have big interest on para rowers, because from my point of view, the most difficult athletes to coach are them. First of all, I want to note from you, and you should explain to us, from physiological point of view, because of the accident, do you think they have the usual physiology that the other rowers, or their physiology has some differences that are very important when you train them? Can you explain to us, and maybe if you have some example, to say how you act when these athletes, they start to be in trouble?
I think probably the most important thing we start with, actually, if we go one step back from physiology, is when we're looking for people, one of the first things we do probably is make sure that they've got the potential to produce the sort of physiological outputs we want in the end, because that can be very limiting because of the impairment we're working with. So I think we're very upfront early on as to whether someone actually has the capacity we're going to want in the long run, or whether it's limited by their impairment. That's probably the biggest factor. I think in terms of the training, there are some slight differences in terms of, for instance, you don't see some of the PR1 guys getting up to the lactate levels you might see very much at the top end from the PR3s. I think that is clear in terms of what you see in output, but I don't think we've massively changed the training as a result of that, because I think it's almost all scaled down from that output level. I wouldn't say we make massive divisions in the way we train the guys physiologically. In terms of what we do with them strength-wise to prepare them to try and produce their best outputs, we do make some quite big individualizations.
I know that mostly for amputation athletes, I know that some your colleague, coaches, they told me that the recovery and the level of tiredness is not like the others, as you said. They don't have a big lactate, but what they feel when they arrive high level of tiredness. For example, they don't sweat, or maybe they can have a collapse, or there are some risks to reach their maximum. This is my question.
Yeah, there are some differences in that sense. I mean, for instance, if you take Rachel, who was our sculler in Rio, we probably had to be much more aware of her kind of heating and cooling just due to her, body surface area. And when you combine that with the fact we were putting her in a seat which almost surrounded her legs as well, that was certainly a factor we had to be aware of. I think when it comes to recovery, I'm not sure how much of that is down to the actual physical output or actually just the day-to-day living stresses that are slightly higher. So if you took one session to the next, I think probably the ability of some of my guys to train at the levels of the Olympic guys is more impacted by their day-to-day living, and the energy consumption for someone who, for instance, is in a chair, their day-to-day living stresses are much, much higher. If you took something as simple as the time from getting up in the morning to being ready to train, that might be an extra 45 minutes, an hour compared to an Olympic guy who can, eat breakfast on the way to the car, jump in the car, and off they go. I think that probably has one of the biggest impacts on training that we end up taking account of, that is probably less so on the Olympic side.
And just because really I'm really curious, do you have some, we say, blood analysis or some kind of evaluation of your athletes to stay in the guard line? Do not overtrain them. Do you use any method, systems, or kind of check?
No, not really. No, I think it's we're a bit old school in that respect in terms of just talking to them and trying to get a gauge of how close to their limits they are. I think we do have a very good medical team there if we start pushing someone over the edge, but there's no routine monitoring in terms of their health, if you like. We do blood lactate when we're training, but there's no kind of health support after that in terms of making sure every month that people's blood levels are correct now.
Do you have a doctor every day with the team?
Yeah, we do have access to a doctor every day, but I wouldn't say we're trying not to use them every day.
Yeah, but in any case, you have a counselor from this side.
Sorry?
You have somebody supporting you.
Yeah, we do. We're very well supported in that respect, but I think we're still trying to almost keep things as basic as possible and make sure that because we have the support there, we don't rely on it all of the time. Like when we travel away, we don't take a doctor with us when we go on camp. So we're trying to make sure that we build a sustainable system that we can still operate in the training on training camps or when the doctor's away.
Uwe, this year you had a very big load. You have one Olympic 8, second in Olympic Games, that is in your hand. And you are responsible at least to maintain the level of Olympics. What you think when they give you, and what you have done to maintain, or we can say also to improve the level of the Olympic Games. What was your plan? What you organize in the team and with the team? Because I think also the rowers are very difficult rowers to manage.
Well, we had some change after the Rio Olympics in numbers of our athletes and quality of our athletes, as it is usual in all international rowing competition. But we had to replace a few in our 8, and we had some athletes coming through with different level of motivation. So some were in Rio as reserves, and they said, oh, well, that's not a job I want to do again. I really want to go into the team. So they had a motivation to move up from reserve to the actual boat, and somewhere in the which had a very bad result in Rio, coming 12th. So they said, we want to move on and we want to reach a different level. And with me coming in as a new coach after Rolf Holtmeier told me we'll have a break after Rio, so I moved in this new position. We had a chance to start from scratch and to give us new goals and a new way to reach the goals. And when we started to achieve our first success, which was the European Championship, then from then on we moved step by step, and at the end it was very successful, and we obviously were pretty happy with it.
Well, okay, just between me and you, no one will listen. What do you think is your secret for to make so fast grew and going so well? Because the 8 is not easy.
Well, Johnny, you know I won't tell you any secret. But there is no secret at all. It's, as Roger yesterday pointed out, it's a result, a good result is a result of hard work. And we all together, athletes, our support staff, and myself included, and my coach's colleagues, we all had a tough year working hard, and only once you work hard, you can achieve your goals. That's the secret.
Good. And I think mostly all are agree on this secret. Robin, to teach a good technique, we coaches, we have many ways to teach technique. First of all, we say theory, what we want, and they said we use models, but maybe we have also some exercise, because I think technique is not just the ideal model in the brain of a coach and rowers, but in the coach brain is a view, but I think in the body of rowers is the feeling, the model of rowers is the feeling of their body about rowing technique. How you teach these feelings to your athletes?
Well, I think before answering the exact question, one of the things I learned as a coach, working with, you may remember Harry Mahn, I don't know, in the room, people, I'm sure some of people you know remember Harry Mahn. And when I had just changed from being a rower, and as a rower in the boat, I think you feel everything. Outside of the boat as a coach, you see everything. So I had just become a coach, and Harry came to Cambridge from New Zealand. And he's a coach, obviously, but he was talking as if he was inside the body of the athlete, as if he could feel exactly what was happening and how you were thinking. And I thought, how is this possible? I've spent 15 or 20 years as a rower. It took me a long time to figure how to move a boat. And how can he know, you know? He's a coach. How can he explain it like this? It really fascinated me. So he was my mentor, and he really made me think about how to coach. When I was a coach, a younger coach, for instance, when Marko Banovic was in Cambridge, occasionally I could get in the boat and row. I could feel if I thought it was good or not so good. Now I'm a lot older, I can't do that anymore. It's not possible. I always thought it's important to see the mechanical things in rowing that you can see and measure. So the length of the stroke you can see, the depth of the oars, the angles of your legs, your backs, how the boat moves, and with things like boat speed on the stopwatch. All these things you can measure, and you can make a judgment about whether the technique is working or not working. But there's the extra part is the rhythm, the relaxation, the thinking, the anticipation, the synchronization in the boat, the subjective qualities which are part of technique as well. And we often see crews which maybe are not perfect, so they don't look perfect because an angle is different or wrong, but actually they go very fast. And also the opposite, a crew that looks very, very good, but is too slow. So I try to teach both, and we use exercises and drills a lot to break down the whole rowing stroke, and I think it's very normal practice in fact in every sport. They do this. I was showing some video recently of somebody learning the pole vault. You know, everybody understand the pole vault? How do you teach somebody to jump 5 meters in the air on a pole? You can't do it, just do it. You have to learn the elements, and it was interesting to see how they do this. I have some video I can show you, possibly. So in rowing, I do the same thing. The individual movements through exercises, how to get the oar in the water, out of the water, how to prepare your body weight. And these are sort of initially mechanical, cognitive things. And then you can integrate them, and gradually the skill comes, and then you can make them as difficult as you want. You can go eyes closed, high rating, and you can make an exercise or a drill extremely complicated if you want to. So it's about producing the challenge appropriate for the level of athlete.
I'm really curious to see this exercise of pole vault. Can you show us and tell us what you say to the rowers?
Sure, I have to go to my computer over there.
Okay, thank you.
The reason for the pole vault is, of course, that before you can jump over the bar with the pole vault, you have to position the end of the pole on the ground. And the same with an oar. Before you can take a stroke, you have to put the oar in the water. So if you can just give me 1 minute, I'll just find the clip.
Okay, at the same time, I have another question for you, Tom.
I got more.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
We lost one.
The rigging of para-rowing. Can you make a question and then you start, Robin?
I found it.
Just for 1 second.
Yeah.
This is how we do the rigging.
Yes.
Okay, so shall I play it maybe one more time? I've never done this myself, but this is obviously they have to teach the athlete first where to put the end of the pole. For us, it's the end of the oar, the spoon. And then you can learn how to load the oar and use the bend in the oar to produce a rowing stroke. So I think this is a good concept for a rower. Or a more simple concept would be, because not everybody will do the pole vault, of course, but everybody could do a jump, a squat jump from the ground. And so concepts like this are I think, very useful. Gianni, I have some, Rosie did slightly prepare me with this, so I have a few short clips of video of some technical drills I can show if you
like. Yes, of course.
Okay. So, for instance, this is the pair, and obviously in English we call them dips. I don't know what they call it in your other languages, but this looks really simple. I mean, it is quite simple, but surprisingly, a lot of athletes push their hands really hard or abruptly, with even violently. This is just to teach them delicate control of the weight of the oar. And then The second progression would be to add the hands away. I mean, we do this with beginners, of course. But they were already Olympic champions, and they recognized the need to always improve these skills. And then this is with a body movement. They make a few mistakes here and there, but and then the next stage is to make the complete, we call it a roll-up in English. In a coxless pair, it's a little difficult, more difficult than in a 4 or an 8. But then the bit I really like, this, is them just before a 2,000-meter race in Breitach in Germany on camp. I didn't ask them to do this. They do this exercise themselves because they want to, and they are curious and interested. And they have 5 minutes before their race, and they understand that this will give them good motor skills, good control, good quality. And I think this is at a very good standard. So I think for me the really interesting thing is how they think, actually. The exercises are physical exercises, of course, but this situation here, this was 3 weeks before the World Championships, and they decided themselves to do this exercise because they realized that it puts them in the right situation for a few minutes later when they have to go really hard, really full power, and row well. And they were always curious and interested in exercises. There's one more, Gianni, which I think is for fun. I can show. So here they have a tennis ball in the boat, and they have to row. The first exercise with putting the oar handle on their feet is, we call it albatross for some reason. It's a name we like. And then they got quite good at doing the albatross, so I said, okay, well, we have a tennis ball as well, just to make it more difficult. And I said to them, I don't think you'll be able to do this exercise. So of course, straight away, they showed me that we can do it. And in fact, even from the motorboat, I could throw the tennis ball to them and they could catch it and keep rowing without stopping, and even throw it back to me. And it made technique a good game. They always thought, well, if we can do something like this, then actually rowing a race is really easy, technically. And it's fun. It made them smile, it made them relax, and it was challenging, trying to always challenge their abilities. So you can imagine after 6 years with the same crew, it gets harder and harder to produce the challenge and make them think and make them have fun, because I've probably seen them row 4 or 5 million strokes. It's a lot, or several million strokes. But so we made sort of games like this as well to try and keep it interesting.
Good. Thank you, Robin. So about rigging of para boats, para rovers, I think I don't speak about Coxhead 4 because there are other issues there that I will ask you later, but about the single and doubles that they use just one or two segments of their body. What you do, which concept, not just the measurements, but which concept you have to rig your boats?
I think we use a number of tools actually to try and help us do this. So I think our starting point generally is we've got an idea of where we think they should be rigged. So we almost start with some basic numbers. So when someone comes in the door who is a different size, we start by using the peach system or even using straws and looking at the basic numbers in front and behind the arc in terms of past the pin. And we start from there. In the double, we obviously put them alongside each other and go, if we use those, what we think the numbers should be, do they actually then work through the stroke together? And obviously we use video to try and help us look at that and look at where the differences come from. I think we then are very willing to spend a lot of time tweaking and individualizing. So once we think we've got the arcs lined up, we then start playing with the blade lengths once we've got the arcs right, or what we perceive to be right. And then if we can't get the outcome we want from the blade lengths, then we go back to the arcs in terms of where do we put the seat compared to the line of work, and do we need to play with that again. And I think it becomes a very iterative process. So we spend, in some days we almost dedicated a day to trying out different rigs while we have the same conditions and actually experimenting. And then once we think we've got something that works well, we'll train on that for 2-3 months. And then have another day where we play around again to check we aren't missing something. I think we were very willing to make changes there, and a lot of credit should go to our rowers for being willing to try those changes. I know rowers don't generally like change, so for us to turn up one day and say we're going to change the span by 5 centimetres, it's quite a big change to suddenly try, and it requires a lot of openness from them, having trained for 6 months, or with Tom, for instance, we changed his rigging in the last 3 months. So the willingness to try different things is very high in our rowers.
Yeah, but why you decide to change? Because it must be something that you see and you say, okay, now is the moment to change. Is there strength? Is there flexibility? Or you understand that the speed of boat is not enough? What pushed you to take this decision?
I think the stopwatch is always one factor. We're always seeking that extra bit on the stopwatch, definitely. And I think we're very aware that we don't have the perfect answer, and there probably is no perfect answer. And unless we try different things, we might never find those speed changes that are there. I think that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is just an inherent sense of watching the rowers and how long it looks like the blade is taking to cover the water, and how easy it is then to get, to complete the recovery and for it to look like a smooth process up at rate. I think that's probably the thing which led us most as coaches to try it. Myself and Nick, the coach I work with, would regularly watch things and just talk about how it looked to us. What should we change? What should we try? Is it better?
So, just to be a little bit more schematic, your target is to have a number of strokes in the race, and then, for example, in winter, that usually the training is lower stroke rate, you have a bigger arc, and maybe when you are close to the races, you change the arc to have a better pace race with the better speed. You have this concept, or you should go a little bit more light in the winter where they have not really big possibility to move, and then you increase the arc when you are close to the race. You have this kind of
I'm going to be honest, I don't think it's as systematic as that. I think we look at our opposition a lot, and we look at where are people going fast and what are they doing to go fast, and is it that we are sort of 3-4 strokes a minute lower? Can we make up for that with arc, or should we increase the blade length? And then we go away and we try that. And I think we certainly in Rio year made a lot of changes between the World Cup and Rio. Just from the insights we've gained from seeing other people and what had worked well with them and their scullers. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we have a really good system where in the winter we row 3 centimetres shorter and then we suddenly increase the blade length for the summer. It wasn't how it worked.
And the cross in normal rowing, we say there is between 17, 18, 16 centimeters. How much you have in the para rowing? You don't have a cross at all, or you have a little bit cross over ends in sculling?
In the singles we row with no crossover, and I think for a long time we tried to row the double with no crossover as well, and then we've actually now gone back to having probably about 7 to 8 centimetres of crossover in the double as well. That's almost come out of playing with what's right, what looks right for the boats. For a long time we rode with that no crossover in the double, and the arc lengths we ended up with too long an arc length, and it looked a bit cumbersome, and people weren't actually driving through the pin that well.
With the pitch system, how much is dark in single, how much is dark in double, as an average, not exactly?
I would say at the longest we've been over the last 10 years, we've been up to 105 degrees of arc in the singles. I'd say now we're almost coming back from that a bit and rowing a slightly shorter arc, around 85, 90 degrees in the singles. I think the 100 degrees was too much.
Yeah, it's too heavy, we say. Yeah. But Uwe, to prepare 1/8, the rhythm, the synchronization, the work together is the base. We asked before to Robin the exercise he used to reach his technical target. What do you do with your 8 to reach target of good synchronization, work together, the same feeling? Do you have some technological supports, or is just your view?
Well, we're in the lucky position that we run a normal, almost centralized program with the main sweep program. We have probably 90% of all athletes together all year round. They're living in Dortmund, they're studying in Dortmund, and they're training together. So that is a very important point, to have the opportunity to row big boat during the week, not only in training camps, but also during the week and on the weekend, so we can row big boats or Cox's fours, basically every day. And we do a lot of development and technical drills in small boats. We have a percentage of probably 50%, 60% small boat training. So in small boats, I think you can improve your technical skills much better than you can do in a big boat. In a big boat, you're influenced from the whole crew. You have the coxswain who's permanently asking for different things, and your commitment. And in a small boat, your feeling is much better to change your individual deficiencies or faults. So in small boats we do exercises, in big boats we have exercises too, but not too many, and no special drills. Definitely not passing tennis balls around the group, because it would take much longer time than it does in a pair. But I like these drills, I have to say, Robin. We spend a lot of time together in training camps in Breisach, and we always saw you working with your crews on very interesting technical levels. So that's very nice to see.
And for many years we know that in Germany you use one technological tool that to improve the feeling of rhythm, the sonic system. Do you use it with the 8? Is it helpful eventually, or?
We haven't used it in the senior system. We tried it maybe once or twice, but it has been used in the junior system. The under-19 squad has used it, and they believe it's useful. I think it's a bit difficult to use it on senior level.
Maybe it's better to have lessons of piano, and they get the rhythm and the feeling of rhythm.
Now, because of the sound in the boat, it's so different. It's a totally new experience if you get your acceleration actually in a sound which is very loud, and I think it's distracting. So we like in the men's 8, we like to have the feeling and the sound of the water and sound of the boat, but that's it. I think we don't need extra sonification of our stroke.
And before Robin has made very interesting points about Adam style and GDR style, and then from these styles there are some difference. Okay, we have also Rosenberg and others, Koniberg. What is your model of rowing technique? Because both models, GDR and Adam style, are coming from Germany. Do you have a special reference to one of the two, or is it compromise, or you just give freedom to the athletes to row and you just see the performance in the boat?
I think today, and that comes back to technology, we have access to videos on all sort of platforms, whether it's YouTube or whether it's World Rowing, or whether it is different platforms. So you have a lot of ideas how different crews, international crews, are rowing, and you can compare your own style or your own technique to what is successful in the world. How does the Cox's 4 in Australia row? How does, as Rowan mentioned it, just looking at the awesome foursome, how do they row? What do they use? So we have access to that, and you pick from everybody. I think you pick from everybody who is successful. You pick one little piece, and then you try to put it together in your own technique and your own style. So I think technique is moving because of access to videos. It's moving closer together. So everybody, I think, has the same understanding of technique. It's not as different as it used to be in the past.
Yes, but there are some key points for you in technique that you want to have it. Can you tell us which one they are?
We work on, in the men's 8 and men's sweep program, we work on the early body preparation from the back turn, the smooth and round movement of hands. So we try to come forward in even speed, not disturbing the run of the boat at all. Then we want to be prepared early and come to the front, have quick catches, very quick connection. As Robin also already mentioned, it is important not to talk about stroke lengths. It's important to talk about efficiency. So when do I get the pressure on the blade? I have to connect very quickly. And then obviously in a big boat you have to get the same speed, the same acceleration to the back. And I think that these are the main points we're working on. Quick catches, early body preparation, very good drive speed, good acceleration.
I want to change a bit the issue, because this is 2017 is a post-Olympic year, and sometimes I like to read the history, technical history of rowing, and I was reading one book, Italian book, with an interview to Carl Adam in the 70s, and he was totally against the mentality of a sabbatic here. And you have been in Australia, where is quite used, the rowers, there is a strong belief, like the Cox's 4. And what do you think about this sabbatic here? Is something that can help from stress point of view, from physiological point of view? Adam was totally against it. He said you lose energy and you will never, or you lose power, you will never recover at least for 2-3 years. Do you have an opinion on this point?
I think it depends on the level of your experience and the level you have reached. If you've done 2 Olympic cycles and you were successful in these 2 Olympic cycles, I think you can have a sabbatical, and you have to, maybe you have to have a break just to refresh and renew your energy, and then try to come back. It's always difficult to come back, but we are in this situation now. We have some athletes from Rio coming back next year, and we will see how they go. But it's always difficult. But I'm not against it. I think in some stage you have to take a year off. Different it is totally different with young athletes. There you have to have training, continuous training, year from year, and to gain your experience and to reach the top level. Then you can have a year off.
Thank you. Robin, which technology you would suggest to make quick improvements? We have seen yesterday with the Nielsen Kellerman presentation that in 300 meters we can change the speed of one boat. Do you have the same feedback with the technology, or you are not so, how to say, enthusiastic on the use of technology like that?
I am enthusiastic, but probably a little bit of a reflection of my age. I've only just changed to a smartphone from a phone that is just a phone. These days your phone has to do everything. So I think rowing technology, I still like something simple like the straw on the stern of the boat to show the run. It's so simple. And we used the strap under the boat, a brake or freno, to create resistance. It's another tool. We've used elastic bands from the handle from the seat to the handle for the front of the stroke, or a strap to try and help the athlete with the geometry of the stroke and which things are moving. So really simple prehistoric technology still is good, but certainly with the telemetry systems like the one we had with GB, the Peach system, I think is very useful for determining basic length, like we were saying earlier, the slip between the entry point of the oar and the connection. That's really useful, and the setup of the stretcher and to check if the rig is working, as Tom was saying. That's certainly useful. But there comes a point where, I don't know, when maybe 20 years ago we had biomechanics in the boat, and I thought, there will be no need for a coach now, because the biomechanics will tell us everything. We can just make all of these power curves the same. The rowers will know what they have to do to change to make their power curve the same as somebody else, and I can step back and let them go fast. The reality is the power curve is like a signature. It's really hard to make it change. And they can be a little bit different, and the boat can still go very fast. And in my experience, I have respect for the biomechanists, but they have not yet been able to tell me which characteristics make the real difference, because sometimes it's 0.0001 of a second in coordination, the difference between a good stroke and a bad stroke. And when you look at the FISA video from Sarasota, for instance, in many races, it takes 3-4 minutes of intense rowing before you see somebody have a bow ball. How can you measure this? It's a tiny, tiny percentage difference. And then in the next 2-3-4 minutes, of course, they maybe win by a length or something. So it's very useful, but I still think the coach is the main technology. The eye, the body language, your experience. And when I was at the back talking about the video, you see 400,000-500,000 rowing strokes a year from your crew. The human brain can tune in fantastically well to what you're seeing when you see them do something 400,000 times. So I still think the brain is the main tool.
I think many coaches they have it, because I think I am the average coach, not really different from others. And as everybody, I try to use these biomechanical systems. And then I try to adjust the boat for what machines say. And we say 95% of the time, or even more, the rowers, they say, we don't feel well the boat with this rigging. It's up. Also, you had the same feedback that the rowers very often are not agree with the machine? It's not a question of a coach now, it's what they feel.
Yes, sometimes you change it and they say it feels better, but sometimes they like the way it felt before, and then you change the rig because the biomechanics say so, but they then change again. They're not a machine, so it's still good. I think it's useful. I think also, the video goggles is a useful idea, but it's a bit heavy. Maybe, I think how with fighter pilots, they have the sort of heads-up display, and sometimes in cars now they have it too on the windshield. That kind of technology would be very good in rowing, because you can still take in everything around you, the environment. But with the goggles, it's another virtual reality, and if the coach shows, I've seen a crew fall in because the coach put the camera down and the athletes fell over, So you have to be very careful. But the technology, I'm sure, will get will improve. But potentially a very useful idea.
You don't think is it kind of? I have this feeling that is a distraction, because if you're one person, because the human brain is not multitasking. We can do once by one. So if you are watching and feeling, so you cannot really realize. So if you're always watching himself, he start to be his coach, but he needs to feel more than see himself. So I think it's a contradiction message that they receive, the brain receive. So in this case, he should make some try on what he see. But I think it's better that coach say to him what to do, and he tried feeling that an instruction of a coach.
Yeah, although I think sometimes a rower, they think they're doing something. Like we say, we want the blade to be closer to the water, and he says, it is close. And you say, no, it isn't. Yes, it is. And then you show them some video. So the video goggles, obviously, it's live. With a normal video, you have to show them afterwards, or maybe show them on the iPad. But yes, I think it's better if they have the ability to see it for themselves. But I was saying a few days ago, talking to a group, I think the best way to teach somebody is when they're in a boat with another really good rower first. The second method is they're in a boat and there's a good boat next to them, and then the third method is the coach. The coach is a third-hand method of teaching, because you're trying to describe in words from 20 meters away. But if you put an athlete an inexperienced athlete in a boat with a good athlete, they learn so fast.
So the example, near to you, the example. Good. Tom, which technology, beside the pitch innovation or other system you use for training, speed coach or stroke coaches, or some instrument to put the rowers in one conditions, especially for the single scullers, to have better position to use the muscles of the body, because I have seen some rowers, they used to put some plastic under the knees. Maybe the effect should be the change in the pelvis position. You use different pelvis position in technique, or is fixed?
I think if I take the first bit of that, I've definitely got a newer phone than Robin. I'm quite a big fan of gadgets. Jürgen used to take the mick out of me and say, Tom, you always have the fastest bike for the slowest rowers. And I think we are obviously using the Peach Innovations, we are using speed coaches, we use a lot of the normal technology that is out there in rowing boats. I think we've tried, because I have quite a young group, we've tried using newer technologies. We've used drones to take video. My rowers are forever sticking small cameras on the boat to get new angles to use in their videos. And I think that technology has been useful. It gives a new perspective on it. I think it's probably most useful because they're excited about it. So if they're excited about being filmed by a drone, they tend to want to row well to be seen by a drone. I think, but in reality, the longer I spend at GB Rowing Team, the more I realise why some of the old methods are the best. and actually the technology can't replace those methods, and why some of the older coaches at GB Rowing Team are wary of taking on lots of new technology. In terms of what we do to get the rowers sat in the boat correctly, we've used some quite high-tech methods. So we've used something called the PDAR system, which is actually a foot pressure sensing system, but we've used it in the seating. So how, where are the pressure points in the seating? How strongly in contact with the seat are the rowers? We've used those, but a bit like what Robin has just said, you come back to the fact that they aren't robots, and you don't necessarily know the best output on the machine you're measuring with. You don't know what perfect looks like. So the best thing you can go off is the feel of the rower, and when all of a sudden it clicks for them. So I think in terms of measuring, that's probably better done by the feel of the rower and them knowing what feels right. But in terms of technological advances, we definitely now use better materials for the seats that we have. So we now make more of our seating out of carbon rather than aluminium. And we're starting to try and, I guess, move in a more advanced way with some of the bespoke bits that in the past were quite rudimentary, quite old-fashioned.
You don't think that the seat is quite old-fashioned? I don't think we are trying to find a lot of technology, but when I see the seat of para rowers for a single, it's something that I don't think is correct. It should be something totally different.
What do you think it should look like?
Because it's how to say, it's like these old castles with a lot of tubes, and there is not possible to find a system where at least is easy, because I think there is one of the problems how the rowers they can be moved by the old straps. There is no system that maybe the seat moves out with the rowers when they are in danger.
I think there probably are other ways of doing it, but I think the seats are improving. If you look at some of the innovations that people like Israel were the first people to make a custom molded carbon seat. I think Norway now have started to make a very advanced seat. I think the seating is progressing. I think there is obviously a cost element to that. It is very expensive, and for one rower to spend, I don't know, $10,000 to make a seat.
So they make their own seat, is not available for all. So everybody can find this seat, or is just for that specific rowers?
I think in the case of like Norway and Israel, that they are made for the rower. It's a bespoke piece of equipment.
Yesterday, I like very much your presentation about the progression of Tom Egger, and I remember very well in the London Olympic Games how he was really not very positive at the end of the race. And then I saw him again after 4 years, totally another person. What have you done to him?
I don't think it's a case of what we've done to him. I think he's found, he found a new love for the sport. I think one of the biggest influences was he actually had a family. So very shortly after London, it was in London he found out that his wife was pregnant with their first child. And I think probably a lot of that enjoyment factor is linked to his family. He now has 3 children. And I think one of the biggest driving factors for him in going to Rio was actually producing a performance that his children would be able to see and remember. I think that was a huge factor in him committing to the next cycle.
So we can say 1 children, 15 seconds, or?
Yeah, let's hope so. I mean, if he comes back with a 3rd child,
we should give advice also to other rowers. But really, it was a huge improvement of performance. So, besides good, psychological conditions, maybe he has changed totally his training preparation, because I understand that when you are more fit, you can go faster, of course. But so big improvement, just using the arms, must be something else behind it. Which method of training? For what I understood, you have a lot of gym with these people. You increase the program in the gym, the strength program?
Yeah, we did. I mean, to be fair, we made a lot of changes. So London was the first time that Tom had lost, and I guess you are always kind of reinforcing what you're doing. If you are winning, you think you keep, this is going very well, we'll keep doing this. And that was the first time we had to take a very strong look at what we were doing and say, what didn't work. So I think it was a very big driving factor for us to almost re-look at everything and then try again. So we definitely changed in the 4 years from London to Rio. We changed the weights he was doing. So how much, how often, what exercises. We changed some of the water work. We spent a lot of time on the seating, so we refined the seating and the boat setup. I think there were very few elements of what he was doing in the London cycle by the time we got to Rio 4 years later. It was a completely different program.
And this progression, this is so fast progression, 1,000 meters, as the distance of rowing, of course, maybe can be even more than 34 seconds. How you think it will be in the future, the speed on 2,000 meters for the single, the double, and the four, and where you will speculate for this progression?
I think we can expect some big changes. I still don't think we're anywhere near the very top end speeds we can expect from the event. So I would still, if I put those graphs up again in 4 years' time, okay, they're 2,000 meters, but I think the average speed in Tokyo will certainly be at least of the level it was for 1,000 meters. I think the distance will double and the speed will be much the same by the time we get to Tokyo. I think probably the biggest steps we can expect in the double and the four. I still think those boat classes, when a country finds the right people, and all four people or both people of the very top level, I think we're still to see the very best outcomes there.
And going on specific rowers, especially rowers that they have a spinal cord illness. I have seen some of them, they have some brachial nerves problems. They are not really totally efficiency. Do you think with electrostimulation is it possible to help the muscles to get some more efficiency, or have you tried or not?
We have tried. There's something called functional electrical stimulation out there for people with spinal cord injuries. We actually used that for a while with Tom Agar as a training tool, just to try and give him, use more of his body than he was using for training. I'll be honest, we stopped using that, partly because we had a concern over building muscle mass in his legs that was not useful on race day. In terms of other nerve injuries, I don't think we've found anything that has massively helped. I don't think that we've done anything in training that has hugely changed people's nerve stimulation. One of the interesting areas in which sport may move is there is a lot of research around, can you repair a spinal cord injury now? Can you repair a visual impairment even? And I think that is something which will change sport over the next 10 years.
Yeah, because I read some articles where they say the nerves are still there, but the road is interrupted. Maybe if you can give some stimulus, you can help, at least not totally, but you can help some, conjunctions between the stop point.
I think I'm right in saying they've now managed to repair the spinal cord in rats. So I think they've now made that jump in small mammals in terms of being able to actually fully repair an injury there. So who knows where we might be? Will there be a Paralympic Games in 25 years? Maybe not.
Rossi, tell me when we should stop. Okay. There are some questions from you. Rose. Maybe I've done enough questions.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a question to Robin and to Uwe, and it's around. Robin, you mentioned about the technique that there's a fingerprint from the boat biomechanics, and I know that that came out yesterday as well, that there's a sort of fingerprint, and you've said it's quite difficult to change. So how can we, with young people, get them to start off with the right model that we want, or the right fingerprint, rather than trying to correct it later? So what would you think are the key things that, as a coach of juniors, starting people off, you should be looking to do to try and help them maximise that fingerprint?
I think it's a really interesting idea if you could give the biomechanics system to a young crew and say to them, can you adapt your curve? Possibly they could, because the seniors have got many, many years of training and they've built the power pathway. So maybe the thing to do is to use the system more with younger crews who could still make those changes. I did once have some success with it, actually. Again, it was with a Cambridge crew. If you can imagine the force curve, the typical force curve, we had 3 people in the crew, in the 8. They were all, to be honest, they needed to make the boat. They were good people, but they had completely different power curves. The peak for one of them was right at the beginning of the stroke, for another one was in the middle, for the third guy was right at near the finish. And we managed to use the system to get them more aligned up. But I think the important characteristics are how early and how quick the power comes on, and we call it the flight path, which is the gradient of the first bit of the curve. Is it steep would be too much force and immovable, but what is the right angle of attack for the stroke? How much power, how quickly? And even though the curve may deviate a little bit off that, once you get a little bit of trunk movement, it appears that the first bit is the really, really key bit in the actual power curve trace. And in terms of the boat information, the point over the stretcher where the boat momentarily decelerates and loads again, that characteristic I think you can teach, and you can change. It's the velocity curve of the boat itself. I think the crew can tackle that and change that.
I think Robin is absolutely right, calling it a signature. On the elite level, it is very, very difficult to change the signature because you have a very high and a very long expertise in your technique, and it's difficult to change it. But once you comparing it to a signature, I think a young boy or young girl is learning how to write in school as a young kid, and your signature looks totally different when you learn writing in school. But the longer you do it, it will be much more stable, and you can't change it anymore after many, many years of writing. But that is, I believe, you should start with biomech in younger years to teach them how the right force curve should look like, and then once it's stable, it's difficult to change. That is totally true.
More questions? I have one more for if I remember well, the ergometer on 2,000 meters over German 8 in these years was never very exceptional. Is it true? Or how much is the average on 2,000 meters?
Well, that's an issue I was asked many, many times this year. We're not the biggest crew, that is true, but I think we have a good ratio of power to weight, so that is important with 8 guys and a coxswain in a boat, almost a ton of weight altogether. So we have a very good power to weight ratio, and maybe some of you have seen the Canal Cup, which was the race two weeks after the World Championship in Sarasota. And in Randsburg, we did 3 different competitions. We did a 500-meter competition on the erg, we did a 500-meter sprint in the 8, and then we did this 12.7-kilometer long-distance race in the 8. And the German 8, we won all 3 events. So we beat the British 8, we beat the Dutch 8, we beat the US 8. on the erg and again in the 12.7 kilometer race. So we're not that weak on the erg. I hope we will be better next year and in this Olympic cycle. But yeah, I think it's more about the power to weight ratio.
I understand maybe that your touch is mostly on this side. You improve the horsepower of the 8?
We try to improve that. We have guys doing a 550 on the erg, and we have guys doing below 6 minutes. So the average is pretty good, but we still try to get better. The Olympic 8, the gold medal 8 from London, the German gold medal 8 was stronger, and the silver medal 8 in Rio was
A lot with body weight. Obviously, it's different when you're picking an international crew and they're more or less the same size. But for instance, for 2,000 meters, if a 70 kilo man can pull, let's say, 6:10, 80 kilo man needs to pull about 6 minutes, a 90 kilo man needs to pull about 5:50, and a 100 kilo man needs to pull something closer to 5:40, roughly. These are just general guidelines. With every 10 kilos of body weight, you get an improvement of time, assuming they're fit. And the same with women. You know, a 60 kilo lightweight woman, 7 minutes. 70 kilo, 6:50 or better. 80 kilos, 6:40 or better. 90 kilo woman, 6:30 or better. And you'll always find the exceptional individual. We know the lightweight men's world record is under 6 minutes, but these ranges work quite well in training our crews and saying, well, if you weigh 55 kilos or 95 kilos, the expectation for you to be a good rower would be that you have to hit those sorts of numbers as a general target.
Yes, but so what you mean is that the speed depends from the ergo values and of course now from the weight, or it can be independent because your crew was not so strong but were fast?
Well, say my women's pair were middleweight. They were about 70 kilos or less. Helen Glover was 67, 68 kilos, so not that big. Their ergometers were roughly in the middle of the group. But power to weight was very, very good. Of course.
So we should say it's more important the speed that one rower can have and not the strength that the rower has. We say power is the ratio between speed and the speed of boat and strength of the rower. So you can have high speed but not so high strength.
Yes, I mean, the ergometer is clearly a really important tool for all of us. It's very good for training and it's individual. But I personally, in Britain, for instance, we have quite a straightforward, simple training protocol. Personally speaking, I like to use different damper settings, sometimes use a dynamic ergometer instead. And, I think I was reading the book chapter by, I think it was Thomas Poulsen in a book that came out recently, and he was saying that they move off the ergometers at a certain time of the year because the lake in Bagsverd was unfrozen, and using dynamic ergometers at the right time of year because it reflects the dynamics of the boat more as well.
What do you think about dynamic ergometer? Do you use it?
Yes, we do. I think dynamic erg is better for the load of your lower back, so we definitely use it to prevent injury, and we use it to improve technique. Obviously, we spent some time in Germany. It's cold in winter as it is here, and our canal is frozen, so we have to spend some time on the erg, and we try to make the best out of it. So we do some training on a normal standing concept erg, and we do some technique training or some rehab sessions on dynamic ergs.
So, Rosie, do we have other questions on the questions? More? I finish also my questions. Okay, good. Thank you very much to all three. It was really interesting. I think everybody appreciated it. Thank you. Rosie, next step.